So we mentioned yesterday that if an animal is designated as a pesach, but then for some reason we can't sacrifice it, we don't know what to do with it. We can't use it for any other purpose, but we can't destroy it. So we leave it to graze until it becomes unfit, essentially until it acquires some kind of blemish. And then we can sell it. And once we sell it, we convert it into money, basically, and then we can use that to buy some other kind of sacrifice. So that's the principle if there's one animal involved. One animal involved. But what if there are a bunch of animals involved? And that's the question which the Mishnah now progresses to in the 8th Mishnah of the 9th chapter. So we're close to the end of the 9th chapter. And now we're going to have all kinds of other mix-ups, but big mix-ups. Pesach shenit arev bizvachem. Some Pesach became mixed up with other kinds of sacrifices. And this is, I think, the kind of stuff that Michael was talking about yesterday afternoon. How do we, once we've designated an animal, how do we make sure we don't lose track of it? Well, okay, we could paint it maybe, or we could tie a string to its horns. But if for some reason, if something goes wrong, and this Pesach gets mixed up with other sacrifices, we're in big trouble because effectively all of them become unfit. We don't know what to do with any of them. And that's the essence of the Mishnah. HaPesach shnita rebis v'chen kulan yiru ad sheyistavu. They all graze. They are all set aside. They all graze until they become unfit. Ve'yimachru. And then we just sell them. So what are we going to do with the money? Well, of course, the Mishnah is very aware that these animals might have had different cash values. So we have a bunch of animals here. Maybe one of them is worth 2 zuz and the other 2.5 zuz and the next one 3 zuz. We're going to go out and buy a replacement for each kind of sacrifice. But how much are we going to spend? Because we don't know which is which. Maybe the animal worth 3 zuz was the Pesach. Maybe the animal worth 3 zuz was the Shlamim. We don't know what the situation is. And that's why the Mishnah says, Ve'yamvi bidmei hayafeh shebahem mimin zeh. So for this particular sacrifice, he's going to buy something of the value of the best of the pack. And he's going to then repeat this. And he's going to buy a replacement worth the price, the best of them for that type too. And so he goes on. Each type that he replaces is replaced at the value of the best of them. And he basically loses. He loses the change from his household, from his own. He's messed up, basically. And maybe, if these animals are worth 1 zuz, 2 zuz, and 3 zuz, in total, he's only going to get 6 zuz when he sells them. But when he buys back, he's going to have to spend 9 zuz because he's going to have to buy a 3 zuz animal 3 times, one for each of the types of sacrifice which is missing, because we don't know which is which. We don't know. Now, what about, and this is a special situation the Mishnah jumps into, what if it became mixed up with firstborn? Nit arev bifchorot. So we have a bunch of firstborn lambs, or maybe even just one firstborn lamb, and our Pesach gets mixed up with it. Rabbi Shimon Omer, it could be a bunch, by the way. Let's imagine a bunch. Rabbi Shimon Omer, im chavurat kohanim yochelu. If this group, remember we're going to form a group to eat the Pesach sacrifice. If this is a group of kohanim, let them eat them. And by the way, yochelu, let them eat. And by the way, they're going to have to eat all of them. All of them. Let's just remind ourselves about a Mishnah in Zvachim, which we brought before when we've been talking about the Pesach sacrifice and the timing. And we say this is part of Shacharit, so it might be familiar. HaBachor ve'Hamaser ve'Hapesach Kodoshim Kalim, the firstborn, the tithes, and the Pesach are Kodoshim Kalim. Now, they're not very holy. And then a lot of the conditions are the same. Their slaughter is anywhere in the temple courtyard. Their blood requires one placement, providing he places on the base of the altar. So we can treat the Bechor and the Bechor and the Pesach in the same way, providing, of course, that the Bechor has to be eaten by priests. But we've said this is a group of priests, right? They're entitled to eat the Bechor. So the Mishnah continues, HaPesach eino ne'echal ela b'layla, ve'eino ne'echal ela ad chatzot, ve'eino ne'echal ela leminyano. It's only eaten at night, and it's only eaten until midnight, and it's only eaten by its registrants. Ve'eino ne'echal ela tzali, and it's only eaten roasted. But all these could apply to a Bechor. They could all apply to a firstborn. So, to get back to our Mishnah, Nitarev b'Bechorot, if this Pesach becomes mixed up with Bechorot, with firstborns, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Im chaburat kohanim yochelu, if it's a group of kohanim, well, they can just eat away, right? Because providing they finish them, I mean, there might be a lot to eat. It depends how many get mixed up. But providing that they finish eating by midnight, and they eat it roast, and they fulfill all the other requirements of the Pesach, they can actually eat the whole bunch of animals. And by the way, and it's a fascinating idea from Rabbi Shimon. By the way, the Rambam explains that the halacha does not go according to Rabbi Shimon. The sages will treat this just like the first case. So the halacha doesn't go according to Rabbi Shimon, but the Mishnah crystallizes his view, because the Mishnah will always crystallize the views of the minority opinion, even if we don't go according to the minority. In this case, of course, it's a fascinating opinion, and it's lovely to be able to just think about what it means and to consider it. Now, what if rather than getting mixed up, what if rather than getting this Pesach, rather than getting mixed up in other sacrifices, what if it just gets lost? So this goat or this sheep, you see why there's a song, right, about a sheep at the end of the Seder service, or a goat, sorry, it's a goat, Chad Gadya. What if this goat gets lost? So we've got a chabura, we've got a company. Remember, we've said, it's in the Mishnah and Zvachim, that the Pesach can only be eaten le minyano. It can only be eaten by its company. It can only be eaten by the group who've signed up, who've agreed that they're going to eat this Pesach. So, Chabura she'avad pischa. So we've got this company, and they had a Pesach once. Once they had a Pesach, but they lost it. They lose it before it is slaughtered, clearly. We're going to come to this later. So they lose it before it's slaughtered. Go and find it and slaughter it on our behalf. You are our agent. So they make him the agent. But, and here's the but, they're not quite confident he's going to find this Pesach. And of course, they have a mitzvah to perform. So what are they going to do? So the guys in the group, they've sent one of them off to look for their Pesach, but in the background, they go and they get a different goat. And they find a different goat and they slaughter it. And they take it. So, sorry, so this guy they appoint as agent goes and finds their Pesach and slaughters it. But they don't have confidence. And they also take an animal and slaughter it. So now, this chavura, this company, has gone from having no Pesach at all, because they lost their Pesach, to having two. And they've both been slaughtered. So what are they going to do? Can they eat one? Can they eat the other? What's the halacha? If his was slaughtered first, he eats it, and they eat with him. Because once his was slaughtered, remember, he's the agent for the group, that becomes the Pesach. That becomes the Pesach. And if theirs was slaughtered first, if theirs was slaughtered first, well, okay, They can eat theirs. They designated it for their own. He can eat his because he was part of the group. He was appointed as an agent of the group. So far, so good. Ve'im eino yadua eza mahen nishchat. What if we don't know which is first? Now it's a problem because we don't know really which is the real Pesach. Maybe we don't know which was first, or sheshachtu shneihen ke'echad. Maybe they were both slaughtered simultaneously. Anyway, the point is we don't know which is which. Who ochel mishlo? He can eat his because he's designated as agent. Hem einam ochlin imo. They can't eat his because if theirs was slaughtered first, then they don't belong to his Pesach. They can't eat his. V'heim v'shelahen yatsa. So what do? V'shelahen yetze levet hasrefa. They have to burn theirs because they don't really know whether their Pesach is valid or not, depending on whether it was slaughtered first or second. Ufuturin milasot Pesach sheni. And as it happens, they don't have to do Pesach sheni because even though they haven't been able to eat the Pesach, they have at least had a Pesach slaughtered. We don't quite know which Pesach was slaughtered for them, whether it was the first one or the second, but some Pesach has been slaughtered for them. So they're exempt from keeping Pesach Sheni. What if he gives them slightly different language? So Amar lahem, im echarti su'u v'shachtu alai. So he goes to look, and they make him an agent, but he also makes them an agent. So we've got a kind of bilateral agent relationship here. So they make him an agent to find their Pesach, and he says to them, oh yeah, look, if I'm late, just go and find one and slaughter it. So they are now an agent for him. Halachu mutzal, he found it, he did find it, v'shachat, and he slaughtered it, v'hein lakhu v'shachtu. This time round, and they did the same thing. They found one, and they slaughtered it. And in this situation, we'd have basically two kosher pesachim. Im shelahen nishchat rishon, hein ochlim mishelahen. If theirs was slaughtered first, then they can eat theirs, and he can eat with them because he made them their agent. Ve'im shelo nishchat rishon, hu ochel mishelo, v'hein ochlin mishelahen. If his was slaughtered first, he can eat of his, and they can eat of theirs. Why can they eat of theirs? Because his was a particular, essentially, why do they eat of his? Because he can eat of his because he's mandated by the group to do that. They can eat theirs because he has he's mandated them. He said, look, if I'm late, you can go and slaughter. If they don't know which is which, or they were slaughtered simultaneously, if they don't know which is which, they can still eat theirs. He doesn't eat with them. And his has to go and get burnt. Because he's made them an agent for him, and it's not certain what the status of his Pesach is. He's in an opposite situation to the first group. Perhaps theirs was slaughtered first, in which case he should be eating theirs, or perhaps his was slaughtered first, in which case he should be eating his. But he doesn't know which to eat, so he doesn't eat either of them. And of course, his is sent out for burning. Amar lahen ve'amru, if they both designated each other, ochlin kulam min harishon, they all eat from the first one. Ve'im eino yodeh mahen nishchat rishon, shnehem yotzin levet hatzrefa. If they don't know which is which, they both get burnt. Lo amar lahem ve'lo amru lo, einan achra'in ze lazeh. If he doesn't say something to them, and they don't say something to him, then neither one is responsible for the other. So in other words, effectively what they do, what they slaughter, they eat, and there's no interplay between the two groups. So what are we learning? Well, first of all, we're learning that intention is vital. Second, we're learning that the group is vital. And we mentioned this before. Pesah is a moment of unity. It's a group activity. It's not something that we can just perform on our own. And it's quite different from other mitzvot. You know, if you need to read the Megillah, you can just grab a Megillah. You know, if there's no one around, you could just take a Megillah and read it. Pesach is different. You do Pesach in a group. And of course, as we've said before, once you're in that group, you know, intention and designation are absolutely vital. And if an animal is not intended to be used in a certain way or designated in a certain way, then it just becomes invalid. And we'll see more of this in the next two Mishnayot, which we'll cover tomorrow.